We begin tonight with the Supreme Court striking down affirmative action and reshaping college admissions. In a 6-3 decision, the justices ruled that Harvard University and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution by considering race when deciding whether to admit someone to their school. A landmark case overturning nearly 50 years of precedent, the latest example of the conservative majority redefining American law, including abortion rights and guns. The ruling means higher education institutions will need to come up with new ways to create diverse student bodies. Groups of protesters, mostly made up of young adults, gathered outside the court to voice their outrage. And to underscore how monumental this case is, 6 of the 9 justices wrote opinions, many personal and strongly worded. CBS's Major Garrett has all the new details and will start us off tonight from outside the Supreme Court. Good evening, Major.
Good evening, Nora. Yes, it was personal, with justices on the touchstone issue of race talking to and past one another. This sweeping and historic ruling effectively ends affirmative action in college admissions, reversing decades of precedent that less conservative court majorities had protected and giving colleges and universities some latitude to consider race as one factor as they sought to build more diverse student bodies. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said admission policies at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race, Roberts wrote. Many universities have for too long done just the opposite. In a scathing dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor accused the court majority of ignoring history and precedent. The court cements a superficial rule of colorblindness as a constitutional principle in an endemically segregated society where race has always mattered and continues to matter. At the White House, President Biden criticized the conservative majority.
This is not a normal court.
And said the nation must find a new way to achieve diversity in college admissions.
What I propose for consideration is a new standard, where colleges take into account the adversity a student has overcome when selecting among qualified applicants.
The opinion also exposed deep personal and ideological divisions within the court. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman to serve on the High Court, wrote in her dissent, quote, "With let them eat cake obliviousness, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces color blindness for all by legal fiat." Clarence Thomas, the court's other black justice, responded, quote, "Justice Jackson uses her broad observations about statistical relationships between race and select measures of health, wealth, and well-being to label all blacks as victims."
We won't go back!
Outside the court, students and civil rights leaders assembled to protest.
I think in this moment in time, it's important for every institution, from colleges to corporations, to commit to pledge to diversity no matter what.
Ed Bloom, the president of Students for Fair Admissions, brought the case to the court, arguing race should not factor into admissions decisions at all.
Ending racial preferences in college admissions is an outcome that the vast majority of all Americans, of all races, will celebrate.
CBS News polling shows that 70% of Americans think race should not be allowed as a factor in college admissions. But statistics indicate that in states that have banned affirmative action, such as California and Michigan, admissions for black and Latino students have fallen dramatically at their most selective universities. Shruti Kumar, a student at Harvard, opposes today's court ruling.
I think the idea that our society can be colorblind is a silly one. We don't live in a perfect meritocracy.
The decision was praised by most Republican primary contenders, chief among them former President Trump, who took credit for appointing 3 of the justices in today's conservative majority. Former First Lady Michelle Obama said she had benefited greatly from affirmative action and vowed to continue her work to build more minority inclusion in higher education. Nora?
Major Garrett on this landmark case. Thank you.
Welcome back to Breakdown Friday. Joseph Ward, Patrick Irvin, a.k.a. Super Pat, Professor Carl Tone Jones. We are here breaking down the Supreme Court's recent ruling or overturning of affirmative action, and specifically targeted the University of North Carolina and the University of Harvard. This has Clarence Thomas written all over it. Clarence Thomas has had a personal beef with affirmative action since he felt like he didn't get admitted into college because of affirmative action. So of course this has his hands written all over it. But we're getting into how does this affirmative action decision affect Black people, because that's who we are, and that's who we concentrate on, that's who we make these breakdowns for. So start with you, PC. What are your overall, what are your first thoughts about this overturning of the affirmative action, this the overturning of affirmative action, and how you feel it will affect Black people?
I really don't care about the affirmative action. To be perfectly honest, man, it's only served us in title only. It, since the official affirmative action rulings and policies have gone into place, Black people have gotten probably 10% of affirmative action gains, and so the primary benefactor of affirmative action has been white women, which I think was the goal altogether. Altogether. So when you start talking about other groups, I mean, other groups such as the Asian community, the brown community, and so forth, they have benefited just as much, if not more, from affirmative action we had. So when you talk about the effects it's going to have on the Black community, I may the black women may suffer from it because they're the only group that might have gotten a little bit, and you could talk about the academic gains that Black women have made over the last few years that have been reported in regards to their enrollment in colleges and things of that nature. But so they may need to worry about that safety net, providing them access to that. But in terms of the Black community as a whole, I don't think it's going to affect us that much. And in fact, I think it should inspire us to start doing for self, start working for us. So that was the first part. The one part I don't really like about it is that how the black community is always scapegoated when other groups who identify as minorities don't get what they want or get the lion's share of the pie. Like I'm tired of this shit. I'm tired of the whole anti-Asian hate bill was based on maybe 5 or 6 videos of somebody getting attacked in a and I'm like getting attacked in like a subway or on the street, and it looked pretty suspect, the video. But you had situations where white men were going into Asian beauty parlors and Asian massage parlors and literally blowing them away in mass killings. But the whole lion's share of the Asian hate bill was directed at protecting Asians against Black folk. I'm tired of Black people being the scapegoat for everything that goes wrong in this country. We got our shit, but the majority of time is Black people responding to the being in a system of white supremacy that was built off of anti-Black hatred. So, and I'm gonna rest right there because there's a lot more I want to talk about. One of the things we'll bring it up a little later on, but I'm just tired of the scapegoating.
Yeah, it's a lot of scapegoating in this because this is groups of people, mainly whites and Asians, who are upset that Blacks and Hispanics are getting admitted in what they feel is, well, Blacks and Hispanics are getting admitted at higher percentages, but not necessarily higher numbers. But we'll get into that. So, Pat, what are your overall thoughts about this affirmative action overturning?
When it comes to the affirmative action piece, let's say this, right? I think it's interesting because to me, this is another example of why Black people should stop screaming about being a part of a democracy and wanting to join up with these clubs and groups that want to create 100% pure democracies. Because again, we're a minority population in a nation that wants a bunch of things that don't benefit us as a group. Now I agree with what PC said about affirmative action largely being like a symbolic gesture. That's not to say it hasn't had any impacts. It has had some tremendous impacts, but last bit of information I come across agree with PC that the overwhelming benefactors of affirmative action have been white women. So that being there, but then I think black people have to understand and accept that the vast majority of the nation doesn't like affirmative action, and we live in a place where we are not. I don't know how to make that any more blunt. So I like it as a representational piece of, look, black folk, y'all keep saying we need a true democracy where and then our voices can truly be heard. And in the true democracy, most people in America don't want affirmative action. They don't agree with it. They don't like it. They don't even understand how they primarily benefit from it. This is spoken of from all of the groups out there that contain a bunch of white women that only have a voice because of affirmative action.
Hey.
I got a
So
question.
Yeah.
go ahead.
How will this affirmative action bill affect HBCUs where,
Well,
so like you see the, okay. All right.
Well,
you
and
know we're
that's why,
going.
yeah, because that's why I stopped where I stopped, because I was like, well, PC hit that on the head, in terms of like we really need to start doing more for, like, affirmative action shouldn't be necessary.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. But so just to make sure that everybody's on the page with what affirmative action is, let's give a break. Let's give a clear definition of it. And this comes from Bill of Rights Institute.org. And affirmative action is a policy usually carried out by schools, businesses, government entities, and federal contractors in which individuals of minority racial status are afforded preferential treatment on the basis of race. Once again, this is how this website is wording it. Affirmative action came about as part of a desire to rectify the traditional underrepresentation of minority peoples in desirable professions and universities, which negatively impacted their financial and social conditions. Supporters of affirmative action claim that it is a necessary mechanism that corrects the wrongs of the past and ensures equal treatment and an equality of outcomes for minorities. Many supporters also argue that white Americans have unfairly benefited from the nation's long history of anti-minority discrimination, which gives white Americans an unfair advantage called white privilege. Opponents of affirmative action claim that it is a form of reverse discrimination that unjustly harms well-being and denies equal access to opportunities for non-minority peoples and for minorities that sometimes do not receive affirmative action coverage, such as Asian Americans. So make sure we
Now,
know what we're working with.
hold on, and even to that whole definition is bullshit.
Thank
Mm-hmm.
you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When we hear that, let's be clear. The initial affirmative action, the push for it to be legislation, was about reparations. It was the actual act of reparations. The actual official drafting was about preparing the damage that was inflicted upon descendants of slaves in this country, not fucking minorities, descendants of slaves in this country who also had to go through Jim Crow and all the other different forms of racism, white supremacy that stagnated black wealth, robbed black people of wealth, and destroyed access to wealth. That's what affirmative action was originally supposed to be before it got convoluted in Congress. So that definition doesn't hold any water to anybody that actually knows anything about the origins of the conversation concerning affirmative action.
Right. So what brought this to be currently that what we're talking about and the overturning is, like I said earlier, specifically dealing with University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and Harvard. And the SFFA, the Students for Fair Admission, the petitioner Students for Fair Admissions, they are the ones basically who have the lawsuit against Harvard and UNC. They are saying that there's that white students and Asian students are being overlooked because of race, and preferential treatment is being given to black students. Now, North Carolina and, well, more so Harvard than North Carolina, from what I was reading in the lawsuit, but Harvard, for how they worded it in this lawsuit, is, well, they've put themselves in a space to where they want to continue, they want to have the racial diversity on their campus, so they say. So the affirmative action that was in place, they felt helped them be able to, and I'm going to say this, cherry pick the best of the best of the blacks. And I use that word cherry pick because that's just what they're doing. They're taking the best of the best. So that goes into what you asked about the HBCUs, because we know that the brightest and the most accomplished black students who are qualified for Ivy Leagues, you know, they aggressively go after these black students to put these black students in these institutions, which means they're taking the resources out of our community and away from our HBCUs. Also, there's another video I watched who, the way they framed it is, the brightest and most accomplished black students before affirmative action were forced to go to lesser universities. And after affirmative action, they were given a leg up to be able to go to the Ivy League schools in places like UNC and Harvard. So now they're saying, because this is being stripped away, you will see, they expect to see a dramatic decrease in the number of black and Hispanic, but we know we concentrate on black, but black and Hispanic students at these institutions. And so the Asians and the whites are like, I don't like it. This is not helping us, and we want to have this reversed. And so that's where the SFFA comes in to be able to bring lawsuits against the schools. So it's what we're dealing with. They are, well, because, you know, it's funny because, you know, the minorities, the idea is the minorities are supposed to stick together. But I think this is another example for black people to pay attention to about what I always say is that racism is a team sport. And other races of people will group up against us if need be, especially if it doesn't benefit both. But racism is a team sport, and if we're not playing as a team, we're going to lose as a team, whether you want to or not. You have to play this game. And so,
Well,